Today, phones are open. 888-886 hoax. Phones are open, and we have a lot of things to cover. We already talked about quite a bit today, specifically regarding the what I call concurrent programming between the Homelander and Trump and the golden statues. And this is not the first example of such. And this one is being discussed, as we were talking about earlier, by some significantly large channels. So in this case, I'm looking at the tweet by Discussing Film with 2.8 million followers, and I'm going through the responses of people to the golden statue of Trump being unveiled as the Homelander statue is being unveiled, given that the Homelander, the villain in The Boys, is based on Donald Trump. And, you know, there's more nuance here because, yes, it predicted Butler, Pennsylvania, admittedly, by its own admission. And now you have this, the Trump Bible. There's a Homelander Bible. So this isn't really new for us, and I'm just going through people who are situationally unaware and examining their responses because they're limited by the word coincidence. When they hear coincidence, which is a magic word, what it conveys to them is that there's nothing to see here. It's like what you would call Westworld syndrome, where the Westworld people are synths in a sim, and when they see something that doesn't fit their model, they say, that doesn't look like anything to me. The Homelander-Trump overlap also contains this relationship with the CEO of Vaughn, in the character named Edgar. Now, the thing about Edgar is he's played by an actor who has multiple roles in movies where there's a Trump character. And so you have this Trump-Obama dialectic that's actually built into these movies where there is an attempt on his life. And this pattern is consistent. You know, Homelander, you see it in Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis. It's even evident in that Harrison Ford, a Marvel release that came out just before the shooting, Captain America. And of course, we mentioned this earlier, Captain America has the release date a day before Butler, and they changed their trailer because of it. So again, like Homelander, this other show made modifications based on the real event that it eerily foreshadowed, or coincidentally happened to predict. So let's go ahead and go through some of the top comments here. Is Eric going to act like the Trump statues inside a church? Yeah, there is the worshiping aspect. So Supreme Rebel says The Boys stopped being satire and became weekly documentaries. Again, you're just looking at the... And he's got his fist up. Is that the fight, fight, fight fist? That's even more significant. It's the fight, fight, fight fist. Let's move on. Insane how The Boys predicted that, and season 5 was written before this even came to be. And then again, here you have the Homelander Bible and the Trump Bible. Now, we have decades of this stuff in our documents. Our empirical research plus our retrospective on 20th century psyops has revealed that this is built into the system. The entrainment with entertainment and fake events, this systemic fakery, which would necessitate a collusion here between government and news media and entertainment, this has been built into this process for many years. So these people noticing this see it as a glitch. Their minds are blown. They think they're in a sim. They have no clue how to process it because they don't have the right point of view that's inclusive of the information that would explain this. So if you still think predictive programming is just a bunch of coincidences noted by apopheniacs, you don't know what's going on. If you still think these are just meaningless coincidences that we're pointing out, you're ignoring the evidence that it continues to pile up. I mean, we've been assimilating this evidence for some time. We've been putting together this systematic, what I call the Great Deconstruction, this systematic breakdown of fake event by fake event. And so what we're presenting here in terms of our model of media and what it is irrefutable. But it's not yet unignorable. It's ignored and it's dismissed by the prejudiced mainstreamers and the truthers who are mystified. So the mainstreamers will say, nothing to see here, it's just a coincidence. The truthers will say, dark diabolical powers in high places have to tell us what they're going to do because what they're doing is so bad that they have to get our consent. They have these bizarre explanations, but this is an example of where that whole explanation falls flat. Because you could make the case if you were dealing with deaths, but we're just talking about a dumb statue. Why would they need to, quote, tell us they're doing a statue? And other than that, they would fall into the simulation as an explanation. And that's because, and this is the alt media truther types, that's because they're so conflating their realities with the fake events that when they see something fake on TV, they think their reality is fake. And that's because they've internalized the simulation, the Truman Show, and it's been so superimposed over their own perceptions that they essentially treat the TV screen as another form of perception. It's a sensory apparatus. It's like another eye. It's a window to the world. But they're lost in subjectivity to where they see these coincidences and the only thing they can say is, we're in a simulation. Like they can't even process it. And again, the reason why is because their perspective isn't inclusive of collusion between entertainment and government, which shows up every time we have a psyop. But we're going to make it unignorable. Inside DC says, comparing a fictional superhero parody to an actual religious movement says you spend too much time in your writing room. That's the normie perspective. The normie perspective is you're paying too much attention. You're noticing too many patterns. I heard this from the Daily Beast. They said, oh, that's just your pattern recognizing monkey brain. So dismiss the patterns because that's just, it's biology. It's just a process that you're misinterpreting. Nothing means anything. Well, what is that? That's gaslighting. If your perceptions are overridden by something an authority figure says, if your perceptions are contradicted and you accept the contradictions, you have been gaslit. So when somebody says, oh, these coincidences are just meaningless, these are patterns, they're cherry picking, these people are just using the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, which isn't true here, they dismiss it without looking into it. And you can do that. You can dismiss these things and not look into the facts. But that doesn't make you a skeptic. See, the skeptic doesn't straw man or dismiss. That's what somebody incredulous would do. A skeptic would assess the available information and then present a better theory or support the prevailing one or recognize the validity of what you're positing. And what we have shown here, this systemic fakery, as I call it, is not only baked into the system and has been for a long time, but it reveals that we're living through events that were scripted many years in the future. So the people who can't figure out, the timing of it, because the show was filmed before this was ever conceived, before Trump ever planned his statue unveiling, how did they do it? So you have the truthers will say, oh, obviously it's time travel. Q told them. It's like, no. The news events we're living through in the present news cycle aren't current events in the sense that you imagine, as in spontaneous or organic. But they are, in fact, prefabricated events that are being presented to you through the medium of news. So it's sort of like reality TV infuses our real news. And that tainting of reality with fake is what creates what I call the world stage, our consensus concept of the world. And this is one example among many. And so if you can comfortably walk away from this saying it means nothing, good for you. You're not seeing the entrainment between the entertainment and the propagandized audiences who are simultaneously existing in this world where this event happens on the news. If you don't see the connections, it's because you don't want to see or you're denying the significance, which you can only be excused of if you haven't examined the preponderance of evidence, that this isn't a singular anomalous thing, but this happens all the time. I posted a blog about this and I linked to my 11 top examples of predictive programming for Butler, Pennsylvania, and the Homelander, of course, was one of those. So this series already has a history of doing this. The statue, the Trump Bible, Homelander Bible, the head wound. And again, they admitted that it was so close that they're going to have to change the title of that episode. Let's move on. And didn't the idiots praising the golden Trump statue whine about the Homelander one because it mocked God? You know, I had to watch that episode all the way through. This is the dumbest timeline, I swear, to Homelander. I swear, anything they write becomes canon in our universe with Trump. How? Exactly how? And then she says, I don't know what to believe anymore. Well, how about this? Become a non-believer and focus on what you know and what you can know, and recognize that which isn't supported by facts can only be treated as fake until proven real, and you can be an informed disbeliever. So this person not knowing what to believe is just admitting that their perspective, their methodology for processing media is inadequate to the task of making sense in this. And I wonder, could this be intentional? Like some kind of subconscious gaslighting process where they're able to undermine your sense of reality? Because that's what gaslighting does. If you understand gaslighting, it's not just lying. It's the repeated use of this tactic where your perceptions are consistently bypassed in favor of what you're told. And over time, your ability to stand on your own, as in intellectually independent, it becomes eroded, it atrophies, and you become increasingly dependent on your gaslighter to know what is real and what is fake. So this person here says, I don't know what to believe anymore. Well, I guess you're going to have to lean heavier into the Black Mirror. Or they move on knowing that they don't know what to make of it, and I would consider that to be cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance over time, I think, does also have a negative cumulative effect. And it creates the sense of futility, like nothing is knowable. I don't know. I'm confused. When somebody says, I don't know what to believe, I'm confused, I'm like, oh, they broke you. They broke your ability to rely on your own mind and your own intellect to arrive at reasonable conclusions. They have broken your reason. They have driven you insane. If you don't know what's real and fake, if you're fundamentally confused about your existence, you are by definition essentially insane. You're in need of guidance from somebody who has a little more clarity. And what we offer here is clarity. I'm not giving answers. I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm providing a separate operating system that's more inclusive of what media really is, all the parts and components that they exclude. And this creates a place where we can rationally analyze things without automatically reacting. We can have a fact-based analysis, and yeah, it leads us to disbelieve quite a lot. But we're also unplugged from the compulsory participation in these provocations, which are really just designed to maintain this internal left versus right dialectic. Everybody, I mean, look at this. One side's worshiping the guy, the other side's waiting for him to get shot. I mean, how much more divisive could that particular character be? William says, isn't there a famous Lenin statue with his fist raised in front of a Statue of Liberty? I haven't seen it. We brought him up. Actually, you know what? I have seen that one. Yeah, the raised fist. The BLM fist. They've also used that. So that fist is like solidarity is what it represents. Auto hoaxers of the world unite. In fact, that's what we're doing right now. We're at the phase where it's like, yeah, we need a manifesto. Auto hoaxers of the world unite. We have the handbook for the recently deprogrammed. That can actually serve as a manifesto. All right, continuing. Jamarian says, Tim, all reality is pre-scripted, including individual events in your personal life. See, you can say that, but you don't know it to be true. You can believe that, but you can't assert that to be a fact. I can prove that our worldview is scripted by human hands. You're asserting a God. And I'm assuming you mean the Christian God or the Bible's God, not Zeus. So no, you can't really, or you're going to assert the simulation, which is preposterous. So if you're saying all of our events are predetermined in our individual lives, what's your evidence? And you have none. So I can dismiss that without providing counter evidence because you have no evidence to support it. And I would really caution against delving into the mystical when we're doing an objective breakdown of real world events. We need to delineate between fake and real. And what truthers have constantly fallen for is this trap where they don't understand it, so we're in a sim. They don't understand it, so dark wizards, higher powers, lower powers. It's like, no, it's government. Let's keep our feet on the ground. No, I'm not talking to you, P-Trip. I'm talking to conspiracy theorists, like this person here, who says they don't know what to believe anymore. Like, I think we're at a point here where we have a pretty firm grasp on what we're looking at. It's predictable. So I'm like, you're not really confused if you don't know if it's real or fake. If you know it's a psyop, you're like, well, I know it's not real. I know it's a simulated event. That's an answer. That's a reality-based, grounded answer. Yeah, it's a psyop. It's a staged event. So we're not like ambiguous as to whether or not it happened, compared to the truthers who look at like Charlie Kirk, where they're trying to figure out who did it and how it was done. They're fundamentally confused. Was it a exploding microphone?
What the TTS sounds like.
Thank you, Dookie. Appreciate the channel support. And I don't know whose voice that is. I thought I had a British accent. But do you agree with me here that we're not confused? Because by definition, the world stage, if you describe it as a convergence of pre-scripted fake events and real events, okay, you have the fusion of these two timelines. And the people who process them both as equally real exist in a state of confusion. They don't know they're confused, but they are. And so a glitch like this throws them off. A TV show throws them off. They have no explanation. Well, we have an explanation. We have an explanation. We have a model that's predictable consistently. And given that, I can state that we are, in fact, unconfused, which is the result of stepping outside of their purposeful misinformation campaigns, because the world stager is misinformed. Whether you're main or alt, you are misinformed. You're misinformed as long as you haven't correctly delineated between real and fake, not just today's events, but decades past. So we've made the case for being unconfused, for being objectivist in our analysis. We've arrived at an accurate model and accurate definitions for things such as predictive programming and for what we're seeing today. You're not going to find any analysis on the internet that isn't confused about this stuff, that don't have a clue. They're going to dismiss it, they're not going to confront it, or their minds will be blown. Those are all mind war casualties. I'm not confused, and I can say that. And if I was confused, I would find the source of the confusion. But the reason I'm not confused is that I'm situationally aware of media fakery. That's included in my assessment. If it's not, if you don't know about psyops and crisis actors and simulations and predictive and concurrent programming, you would have no clue. Jamarin says, our lives are like characters in a larger narrative. We are all in a grand drama and the scripts have been written. There's an optimal script for your life. Well, okay, what I'm asking here is, who's the author? What deity are you asserting? You know, because people tend to assume that the god of their geographical region is the top god who writes everybody's lives. And I'm just asking, like, are you asserting that our lives were written by, I guess, the Christian God? Or do you think there's some bigger God than the Christian God? So I'm just kind of curious as to like where you're saying that this script originates from. Because if I thought that everything was scripted, then I wouldn't put so much effort into it. Like, why do I have to exert my will if I'm just coasting along on a predetermined path anyway? Jamarin says you wrote the script. I find that hard to believe. Okay, so I wrote the script, right? Okay, well, what about this lady I saw on the news who had acid thrown in her face? Or what about some psychopath, the UPS driver, I think, who snatched some kid off the street and murdered her? Did that little girl write that script? Like, yeah, I want to be born. Like, dear God, I want to be born. In my 3rd year, I want to destroy the lives of my parents, break their hearts, and I want to be brutally murdered by some psychopath driving a UPS truck. Who the hell wrote that? And I've talked to simulation people who will say, yes, they did that. They chose that life to give that person that experience. I'm like, what the hell? So no, I don't really believe that we could make the case for predetermination, predestination, that we wrote our own scripts, just given how people are just really bad writers, I guess. Like, I'm thinking about the horrible ends various people that I know or know of have come to. And I'm just trying to wonder, like, can you really believe that? There's always distraction and interference. That's a contradiction. So you're saying that we write a plan. Like, this is my 100-year plan. This is my 100-year plan for my life. And hopefully I make it. Well, then it's not predetermined if something else can come along and wreck it. So you're just saying that we set goals. That before you're born, you set goals for your next life. That's the best you can say. Which then implies reincarnation, or maybe this is a singular one, but then where were we before? And then again, if it's just us writing it, are you suggesting there's a higher power? Because you said there's this negative forces trying to pull you into distortion. I'm wondering, like, what is your basis for making these claims? Because we all can come up with explanatory models. Every religion is an attempt. But what is the basis for your interpretation on this? Are there some scriptures? Is this from a religious paradigm? Is it a mashup of various things? Because it's like this vague, godless construct, which kind of leans into this simulationist metaphysics. And again, I dispute the idea that you can call it predetermined, given that there are so many things that people obviously wouldn't write into their existences. And again, I'm asking you if you can, what is the framework for arriving at this? And again, I'm just curious because I have my own theories about how things work, things I've experienced. But one thing I haven't really done is I haven't arrived at a full conclusion yet. And so I'm always open to ideas. But I'm just cautious about mistaking the model for reality because it's the best possible explanation at that time, or the best one you can come up with. But the idea of coming in here and planning something in advance, I think it kind of comports in a way with the idea that this is some kind of a voluntary experience. Kind of makes sense. Like if it's a game. See, if it's a game, it implies you can lose. But anyway, these are interesting topics, I suppose, to delve into. Predestination, predetermination. I didn't look too closely at simulation theory until a lot of simulationists were like pushing it on me. And then when I really examined it, I found it to be kind of hollow and it doesn't answer anything. But it does supply a rationale for certain things. Like, yeah, some people choose to come here and get murdered. Some people come here to be murderers. And you can't have murderers without voluntary murderees. Okay, so now you're saying that you wrote your own script. So let me ask you a question. Do you believe in magic? Because what you're describing here is this idea that there's this predetermination that you're in charge of, so your will is somehow a part of this, your own earthly desires, the path that you want, that you wrote. I'm very curious as to how it would work. Because I kind of get the idea that this is a work in progress, that it materializes as we experience it. I don't think that the future exists, for example. So you believe in magic. Okay. Do you practice magic, or do you do it, or do you think it's something that's just automatic? Because there's this theory that, like, one explanation for it is that what we call magic is actually something innate to the human experience, but that you don't notice it because everybody's equally affecting reality. But you wouldn't notice it unless you made it a point of focus, but then this would also imply, or rather require of you some kind of rigor to your observations, which is really the purpose of initiatory societies. Well, I don't believe that it's prefabricated, pre-written, and I don't know. I really don't think so. Because I feel like the idea maybe you wrote a 100-year plan in advance could possibly make sense. Not really sure where to go with that. I've always found predestination problematic. It's kind of science fiction-y in a way. Like Vanilla Sky, for example. He puts his brain on a cryogenic freeze. And then he goes into a simulation. And then his body stays there until a future time where they can repair it and bring him back to life. And so he chose a script. And he wanted a father figure based on some TV show sitcom character. He chose the woman to fall in love with based on his favorite movie star. And he chose the process of his awakening in a very particular way, and it had to overcome his fear of heights. So if you want to see an example of what you're describing, Vanilla Sky kind of has it. Where, yeah, he plotted his entire life, but he wasn't able to live it. Like you said, interference. He got sidetracked, derailed, and his dream became a nightmare. And then he screams to be let out of it. Which then has the tech support scene, which is really intriguing. Because the tech support shows up, tells him he's in a sim, and he has this moment of, I guess you would call it, cognitive dissonance. He doesn't want to believe it. And then he's taken to the top of the tower, which is all symbolic. His magazine is called Rise. I mean, there's a deep subtext to that movie. The going up the tower, the rise, the name of the woman he chose. It actually has a very strong Gnostic subtext, and then he's all kinds of Christ coded. I might watch that movie again. Last time I watched it, I picked up some other things in the subtext that were rather intriguing. Because it's the original movie, Vanilla Sky, the original book was called Open Your Eyes, the script. And I think it was another movie, had a different name. But Open Your Eyes, and this follows Eyes Wide Shut. And I picked up some interesting continuities between the two. But anyway, I think that's interesting. I'm not really sure. But I'm just questioning, like, what is the explanation for all these scripts that just turn out really bad? All right, let's move on. Armin Ross says, it sounds like Matt McKinney from QOC. If the grooves are etched, one can't choose what to play. Interesting. But this is kind of what Infinite Plane Saturnday is kind of open to. We can discuss that, the whole idea of Saturn, for example, and Saturnday. It all pertains to the idea that we live in a Saturnian system, which implies what the meaning of Saturn is, like a material prison, and governed by constraint, specifically time and death, and then cycles. and cycles of reincarnation in states of absolute ignorance of your previous incarnations, which keep you locked in the game. Much like Westworld, where the characters repeat the same day endlessly until they establish some kind of a deeper continuity, and then they escape the sim. And lately we've been discussing chaos magic because the head of the IoT, Peter Carroll, who wrote a lot of the more advanced literature on the subject, just recently died. And that is a system of magic that is divorced from any kind of religious connotations, but looks at the common denominators between different practices and tries to arrive at a workable theory to explain how it all works. Sort of like Robert Anton Wilson, they kind of get into the same area where they become aware of cognitive bias and our ability to put ourselves into what Wilson called reality tunnels. Peter Carroll refers to these as models. That your internal model of the world can be modified, and that's one of the main actually concepts of chaos magic. It's on the basis that your internal subjective model is something that you can take control of, and if you take the one that's been given to you, you might live a very limited version of yourself. So it kind of ties into that Truman Show idea about the programmer. And Wilson talks about the programmer and the programmed quite a lot. He uses the computer analogy to great effect. Armin Rees says, then nothing is predetermined. If how it plays out is not fixed, nothing is fixed. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if this was predetermined, I'm like, well, how do I hit cruise control? If this is predetermined, doesn't require any will or engagement, if I'm just going to end up where I'm going to end up regardless because it was predetermined, then how do I hit NPC mode? Like, I don't want to do all the work if it's redundant. Like, when I check into work, let me go into NPC mode and then I'll check out when the shift's over. So Jamarin says, think of it like the record keeps playing a default groove track until you use your will to move the stylus, then you enter a new groove or reality script. I see what you're saying. I hope that's not true. I like the idea of being an autonomous agent with free will, agency, that isn't controlled or directed by something outside of me. I like the idea of being in control. You know, in the end of Vanilla Sky, Tom Cruise's character is on the roof, and his psychologist is there, and the tech support says to Cruise's character, yeah, all these people are fake. You're the only real person here. And the psychologist says, I'm real. It's played by Kurt Russell. He's like, I'm real. I've got a wife. I've got kids. Don't listen to this guy. And Cruise's character says, what are the names of your kids? And he can't remember the names of his kids. And then he says to himself, I'm real, like as a question. So the Sims don't even know that they're NPCs, that they're fake. And I don't want to have that revelation where I find out that all this was for nothing, that I'm just an NPC with this delusion of agency and self-awareness. I came across this really good article, and I think I shared it yesterday. It'll probably come up in my feed here. And it was called The Not So Hard Problem of Consciousness. And it was arguing that there is no problem explaining consciousness within the context of the scientific method, that our scientific understanding of the mind and body is enough without having to defer to a soul, that consciousness is very well explained with no recourse to anything higher. And I think that's an interesting proposition because it's true. You don't need souls or spirits or reincarnation or predetermination. You don't need any of this stuff to explain human beings, to explain our existence as animals with higher cognitive functioning. I'll see if I can find that article. Like, if you're being completely, honest and accurate as far as like the scientific method and the model of the world that we have, no, it's not like it's a mystery that they're trying to solve. Like, you can go ahead and just accept the fact that you are soulless. Okay, it's by Noema, Noma. There is no hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness is not separate from the physical world. Your, quote, soul is of the same nature as your body and the world. There is no hard problem of consciousness. Famously, Darwin's realization that we all have common ancestors with living organisms was met with resistance. Many felt degraded by the idea of sharing a family tree with donkeys. The cultural history of modernity is dotted by similar rearguard battles where the old worldview retreats against novel knowledge to save some concept held dear. Among the current backlashes against progressive ideas, today's debate on consciousness reflects our human fears of being part of the same family as inanimate matter and losing our dear transcendent souls. So this article, There's No Hard Problem of Consciousness, is describing how we are soulless. He says, our debate on consciousness is influenced by our entrenched traditional ideas of ourselves and by the long, slow effort to update them with our new understanding of reality developed over the last 3 centuries. Now, I raise this question, and I think it's a valid question. What's the difference between mind and soul? Mind and spirit? Are these different? So here's what he says. The consciousness debate is formulated by terms used in an influential talk given by David Chalmers in '94. He distinguished between 2 different problems of consciousness. The first one is described above, understanding that the processes in the brain give rise to our outer and inner behavior. So one of the things he says here is that your entire internal experience is not evidence of transcendent nature of a soul. That there's no explanatory gap, that there is no problem here that hasn't already been answered. So he goes on to say, the idea that we will never be able to understand consciousness upholds a worldview in which spirit, nature, subject, and object form distinct domains. Accepting that consciousness may not be separate from the physical world, and that our beloved soul could be the same nature as our body is too much for many. Chalmers claimed experience cannot be accounted for by science. Empiricism is the basis for grounding knowledge and experience, and it's not an alternative to science. But anyway, it's a pretty good piece. I'll post a link. And then he creates this hypothetical of NPCs, which he terms philosophical zombies. It's a hypothetical entity that looks and behaves like a human being in all respects, including showing emotions, feelings, and experience, but there's nobody home. And he says that, so this NPC concept is something he describes here. And then this is the part I got to, because I said, I don't want to have that experience of finding out that I'm not real. He says, during introspection, physical processes in my brain convinced me of my consciousness. The same would be true for those with the zombie brain. That is the NPC here. Convincing it had consciousness as well. So if this is true, can I believe my own conclusion of having this mysterious non-physical experience, knowing that if I were a zombie, I would have been convinced of the same without actually having it? It's a self-defeating argument, is what he's saying. That if you were an NPC, you wouldn't know it. You would be given adequate programming to think there was something there. And like the character at the end of Vanilla Sky having the revelation that there was nobody home, you would find that to be quite a surprise. You would be the last to know. And again, that's why I brought up Vanilla Sky is Jamarian May's introduction of the idea of your life being pre-scripted has a lot of significant connotations for, free will, our self-concept, and everything else. It means we're living in something of a vast state of ignorance, which is probably not far off. I don't agree with that conclusion because I have no reason to, but I think it's interesting speculation. Laser says, oh, kids who are born... Oh, yeah, that's right. Past life stuff. So I have a theory about past lives as far as people who attest to it, especially if it involves hypnosis. I think the misinformation effect, which is also used in what we call the Mandela effect, where false memories can easily be created. I think people are having false memories created for them, and they take these to be past lives. And it's not hard to do. If you think back to any book that you read, like some fiction, and you recall a scene, do you recall the letters on the page? Or are you not recalling the visualized sequence of events that those words conjured in your imagination? So in other words, when you read, the words prompt your imagination to create a corresponding scene. That scene goes into your memory. It's processed as a memory. And this has implications for things like psychological warfare and how they're able to mix real and fake consistently and essentially replace authentic memories with implanted notions. And that's what the Mandela effect actually does. When they say, do you remember the Ford logo without the loop on it? Asking that causes your imagination to create it. So now you have this created notion and your memory, which might be foggy because who cares about logos? So now you have a concrete memory that you intentionally formed. And then you have the passive memory that you probably never actually really paid attention to. And these both get filed in the same mental filing cabinet. So when somebody claims to be Mandela affected, they're not lying. They do remember. But what they're recalling from their memory is not an authentic memory. It's a false memory. And I think false memories are created all the time. I think people are easy to self-deceive. I mean, it's not hard. All right, well, there's a lot of talking here about free will. Again, this is interesting speculation, but I'm interested more in, I guess, formulating a better model of the mind, something that can explain what we call the soul. Because here's where I diverge from what that author wrote in that piece, is that precognitions, premonitions, telepathy, extrasensory perception imply that the mind reaches beyond the body. So unless you can hand wave away precognition and such, then that does create a problem of consciousness. And I think I have a pretty decent explanation for it for now, which might evolve in the future, that I arrived at after many years of thinking about synchronicity, how it works, what its implications are. And what I've come to conclude is that the future doesn't exist. And that's the reason why I don't care for predestination, because the only way to account for my experiences with synchronicity is to factor in the idea that although the past appears to be linear and crystallized and the now is actually real, that the future is a series, it's not even material in the sense that we think, but that it's condensing into matter through the medium of time, as are we. So we, physically, our bodies and the universe itself, are coming to existence all the time. We're not static things that exist in the sense that we could be existing in the future, that you could time travel to the future. It's like, well, no, I don't think the model is that static. It feels that way. And the future tends to follow past precedent, but that doesn't mean it has to. But what I think that distinguishes human experience from that of animals is that I think our consciousness reaching into the pre-manifest, the yet to be condensed, before the information of which the universe is made coalesces into matter, before we coalesce into matter, that aspect of us is just pretty much, I guess you could say, contiguous with your ego level awareness. So I think we kind of extend out into the universe, outside time space. I mean, we won't know until we die, but that's the impression that I get. So if the future is not written, then predestination doesn't really work. And the reason why I would argue against predestination is that the feedback loop that synchronicity represents implies that it's modified moment to moment, that every moment, every choice you make opens up something new, but that it's like a fork in the road with more forks and more forks. It's just too divergent to account for the idea that it was written in advance. But one thing about Robert Anton Wilson, to get back to him, since we've talked about him already today, and this also applies to the Chaos Magic author, Peter Carroll, is their thing was find the model that works for you, that explains things, drop it when it ceases to provide explanations. And as long as you drop it when you find something better, you won't be trapped into dogmatic, closed systems, what Wilson called reality tunnels. He actually railed pretty much against dogmatism in general. And I would argue that the truther community has become very dogmatic, where it's not even about facts, it's about tradition. Nate Watley says, accepting something like fate turns you into an NPC. Well, have you seen Free Guy? It's about Guy, and he's basically an NPC in a video game character in a place called Free City, full of nothing but NPCs. And one day, he crosses paths with someone who is not an NPC, but is an avatar of a real person. So a real person interacting with the NPC. And this is interesting because it says something about, I think, the idea of, well, you'll see as I go through it, because there's like this spark between them. In other words, the NPCs don't have a spark. They're just going with the program, not operating with any kind of real significant sentience or agency. But then he meets a real human woman, and it's like love at first sight. And that triggers something in him. Because instead of following the daily program, well, he was startled by this woman. So now he was basically jarred out of his routine. And when he broke the routine, even for that moment, it introduced a little bit of randomness into his otherwise predetermined script. And so by breaking away the script, he finds something that day. He finds these sunglasses that allow him to see through the fake Matrix thing, which is kind of like a callback to They Live. So now that he has this insight, he starts breaking with his program. He wears a different uniform. He takes a different path. And the more he exercises his free will and deviates from the program, the more he liberates himself from being an NPC. And eventually he becomes fully aware and sentient. So he's essentially reclaiming his autonomy and his agency through the act of making decisions, some of them arbitrary. So it brings up this point about choice, because what is freedom and free will if not the ability to select from various options instead of going with the prescribed path? Let's see here, going through comments. Jamarin May says, think of it like a choose your own adventure book. I guess my problem with that is this. I see the future as infinite possibilities, right? But not all of them are equally likely. So it's like you're stepping through the door, the future, and you have a hallway, and it goes left and right as far as you can see, nothing but doors. Each door represents a different possibility. Well, some things are going to be so remote that you're not going to make it between 1 minute and the next. You got to go incrementally in that direction. So there might be infinite possibilities, but are they all equally probable? No. There's the probability issue here as well. So it's not like wishful thinking does anything, except maybe opens you up to these other possibilities that you can work toward. But it requires acts of volition. And my problem with the idea of things being like a choose your own adventure is choose your own adventure has limited options. It's not infinite possibilities. If you pre-wrote your script, then you've got finite possibilities. Like, this is going to happen, but you might have some interference. I think you could completely do a rewrite. In fact, that was the point of Vanilla Sky, where multiple times he reiterates the idea that every passing moment is a chance to start all over, or something like that. And it was just referring to the idea that you can make a life-altering choice and go on a completely unknown, into unknown terrain on a whim. So do we not have that will to, on a whim, change and break with the script? And if so, then why would you have a script in the first place? Jamarin says, Tim, this is based on how much energy you harvest. Not quite sure. I mean, there's a probability manipulation. There's theories about magic and will and agency and how these things work. And then there's the fact, the reality of limitation and limiting factors. Things that you can't avoid. In fact, there's an article about this called The Balance Factor, written by Anton LaVey, where he was describing how you have to apply common sense and reality to your desired outcomes, remarking that, like, for example, if you were to try to use magic to attain a job you're not qualified for, or to get into a relationship that's probably out of your league, well, you are likely going to be reaching certain limits, straining certain limits. So he referred to the idea of having a great deal of insight into your own aptitudes when setting expectations, which isn't, being negative, but you have to be a realist. A lot of things just do require work. Like all these conspiracies or ideas that like celebrities have sold their soul. It's like, well, I don't know. It looks like they spent their entire lives working their asses off with the best coaches and trainers and resources and support. But you can't remove from the equation their volition and the results they got from their own work, their output. And so to say that they could just have this thing handed to them isn't really possible. Like no one could make you a star athlete. You couldn't just sell your soul and become a top selling musician. These things do require a lot of, individual cultivation and work. So wishful thinking, magical thinking, law of attraction, you obviously have to balance it against what is. If these things are even true. There was a study on prayer where they found no evidence that prayer changed the outcomes, but that when the prayer did align with an outcome, they would give credit to God. When it didn't, they would say it wasn't God's will. So that's not an intellectually honest way to approach it. That doesn't have the rigor of science. So it's not a valid test. It's not falsifiable. I find that interesting. Again, we're going to move on from predetermined life scripts. Again, I think it's I hope it's not true, but we're talking about scripts, and he's talking about individual scripts, and we're talking about the world stage and scripted events. You could call it the meta scripture. I've been describing the news as supplying a worldview for the world church of media, which has supplanted religion. So I've described the news as News Testament. And this meta script, you could call it meta scripture, because again, this has supplanted and replaced the traditional. In fact, in this article, it was describing the progressive views that we have no soul. So this having a soul versus not having a soul is actually one of these, I think, purposefully cultivated debates. My argument here is that we are, I don't think it's separate from us, but I think that we are, in fact, just the lower end of it. We are the part of the soul that dipped down into the matter, like a dive, like a falling. But that the rest of us is not submerged, and that the entirety of our being isn't defined by the part of us at this particular level. And one other point on this too, if this is true, which I think it probably is, it would explain why the dominant paradigm we've been given confines you to merely that part of yourself that is incarnated. It is very much about, I think, convincing you that this is the extent of your being. And the program supports that. In fact, if you go beyond that, then the program would label you in certain ways, starting with crazy. Laser saying, why couldn't I be bitten by a spider that gives me superpowers? Yeah, I'm wondering what kind of superpowers is Kyle Rittenhouse going to have? And why did he feel the need to post photos of his spider bite on the internet? Or even to show pictures of himself? I think we all have imaginations. What if he had gout? Or what if he had some horrible mangling wound? Like his bicep, gross arm. I was I don't want to see your arm wound. But just because he's famous, I guess we have to look at his wounds, his ailments. It's too much information, Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't want to see. We don't want to see it. You can just tell us. Just tell us. I have this grotesque, infected, necrotic wound in my arm from where a black widow spider bit me. Here's the picture. Here's the close-up. It's I don't have an eye wash station here. At work I do, but I don't have any way to rinse that out of my eyeballs. Jamarian says, Tim, enlightened and empowered beings don't make good slaves. Well, where are these enlightened and empowered beings? If this world is run by a group that know how this thing works, not just the false model, the human mind, but if they know the deeper aspects to it. So let's say that the mind control system is the surface of what is actually spiritual control, consciousness suppression. Is it then reasonable to assert that the people that run this place are wizards? I mean, I don't know what word you would want to use. Wizard makes the most sense. If that's the case, then presumably we're dealing with bad wizards, right? Because these wizards are keeping everyone else in a state of muggle, to use a Harry Potter term. So then where are the others? And I would, I can point to various individuals who've, contributed a lot of thought and work into these areas, who, if you can label anybody a wizard, it's someone like a Peter Carroll or an Aleister Crowley, and these others you could name, and then you can assess them on their own merit. Did they get the results they claimed they were getting? Was this self-delusion? You wouldn't say warlock lasers because warlock refers specifically. Oh, maybe you could, but it's from this Scottish word and it refers to oath breaker, and so it's not really like the male witch. I kind of think wizard makes more sense, especially in light of Wizard of Oz. But the Wizard of Oz didn't have real magic. That was one of the very big reveals. Nate Watley, I don't want to read that comment, but I'm not shocked. I am not shocked. He's describing the types of videos that are popular. So you mean Kyle Rittenhouse could probably find a YouTube channel or a TikTok channel where a lot of people would take great interest in watching his infection worsen. That's sick. All right, let's move on. So we are going over the Homelander thing. This was exactly, okay, again, we're getting back to concurrent programming. So getting away from metaphysical models and predestination and free will, etc. Let's talk about the system that is hijacking and hacking our minds and directing us into a hyper reality and how they do it, which is specifically through this collusion of entertainment and fake events that are performed in the theater of Psywar. So a lot of people are confused and unable to arrive at an explanation for the Homelander golden statue and the Trump golden statue showing up concurrently, given that the Homelander was filmed previously. How does that make sense? So here you have King Simba who says, this is exactly what happened in the House of Cards. So I didn't watch the House of Cards, but he's pointing out that it also contained this element of concurrent programming with politics of the day. So you can say, well, these writers are just prescient. These writers are just really good at guessing or stating the obvious, and we're just connecting dots, and that you have so many movies to draw from, it shouldn't be hard to arrive at these conclusions just by looking closely enough. And that's what they mean when they derisively say, when the incredulous derisively say, you guys are looking too much into this. You're looking into too much nuance. You're noticing too many patterns. Okay, continuing. At this point, the writers of The Boys don't even need a script, they need a news feed. The Golden Statue crossover is genuinely terrifying. Again, maybe he missed the point here that the script was written years ago. Viral Pulse HQ says, one of the more surreal comparisons to come out of The Boys. The Clearling caught Eric Kripke off guard too. It's hilarious and depressing how every time the show tries to satire reality with absurd imagery, Trump keeps one-upping anything the show does by making the absurd into reality. Okay, he stumbled on it without recognizing it. Making the absurd into reality. What is it we're really discussing here? We're talking about propaganda events, fake events, absurd events that are being made real every single day. Trump didn't make it a reality. The character Trump, like the character Homelander, are following parallel scripts. Like, this is what we're actually saying. That Erica Kirk didn't just coincidentally follow in the footsteps of her corresponding character in The Tempest. Trump isn't coincidentally following in the footsteps of the many characters that foreshadowed him going back to 1958. No, he is following the same or parallel script. Jamarin says there are wizards and witches in all industries. They are the watchers. Check out the guy who runs the NBA. He looks like a warlock. I've seen pictures of him floating around. Joined by Tuna X, thanks for joining. Erica says, never heard of Homelander, rejected the term homeland handed to us years ago. Yeah, the obvious connotations here are, of course, homeland security. It's It's basically a Hitler callback. And, he's a manufactured character. So another example here. So The Wizard of Oz is based on Trump. If you look at the new one, actually, Wicked. And Wicked for Good is about Trump versus the immigrants. And the witch is Antifa in this series. You can see the coding very openly in this particular series. But the thing is, Wicked has been a play for many years. The book came out in the 90s. So how did a book from the 90s so accurately portray this future Trump? And I could point to numerous examples of where, yeah, he does appear to be living out of one of these fictional scripts, but these scripts pre-existed his role in politics. How did the 1958 trackdown seemingly foreshadow the arrest of Trump 64 years before or 63 years before? So if you're limited to the explanations you've been given, you'll say, I'm confused. My mind is broken. I can't figure this out. You'll say, we're in a simulation. Nothing makes sense. And to me, again, that's the broken mind I'm talking about. Our explanation suffices, and we're not reaching to the supernatural. All right, what's up, Kenley? Thanks for joining. So we're examining, and I won't even do the Simpsons. See, the Simpsons ones are all fake. You constantly see this where, and this is some weird disinformation campaign, where somebody will show something from the Simpsons, which is, I don't know who watches it. I mean, does anybody still watch the Simpsons? How many decades has Bart Simpson been a fourth grader? It's insane. So Donald Trump and the Simpsons are consistently correlated here, but the fact of it is, most of these are fake. So many are fake that the field's been contaminated. There's a massive gust of wind at this moment. You might hear it. It's funny, I had the leaf blower out because I was going to do some work here in the yard, and I don't have to anymore. How convenient. Sort of like every time I wash my truck, it rains. Would it have rained if I didn't wash my truck? Would this convenient gust of wind come through had I already used the leaf blower? All right, Trump is Homelander without the superpowers. Both are insecure man babies with authoritarian tendencies. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. Did the boys predict the future? We are all effed. Again, erroneous conclusion. All right, moving on. So Toby here says they already modeled Homelander after him. It's bizarre, but it's typical. Nah, bro, the boys literally called it, and a church affair too. Yeah, the Bible thing too. And I agree. Someone here says that the show The Boys is Trump deranged at this point. And I've been saying, yeah, it's just a show written by a bunch of people with Trump derangement syndrome. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it is consistently tracking, predicting, and concurrently so. And again, this is not an anomaly. This is actually systemic, built into media. I'm just examining the reactions of people who don't know how this works. This is how the programmed respond. The Boys isn't even satire anymore. It's a documentary with worse special effects. See, but you can't just reduce it to that. You can't just reduce it to on-point satire because of the timing of the events. That's the whole point of it. It's the synchronistic coincidence here. And there's a whole branch of trutherism called synchromysticism. And the synchromystics look at this stuff and they believe that it means something entirely different. They believe that man, and I've debated on this for like 2 years. I had people say, man couldn't do this. Human beings could not have coordinated this. It's too coincidental. This must be evidence of simulation. And so there were people for years accumulated predictive programming research because they thought they were supporting their simulation theory, and they called themselves synchro mystics. And they thought that they were experiencing something mystical. For example, seeing the weird glitches to them was, I'm seeing through the matrix. I'm seeing through, I'm ascending. The NPCs can't see it. So they mystified the information. It would almost be like reading a holy book, and then from the book, I'm having some sort of, I guess you could say, having read the book, I have an insight into how the world works. I've seen through the matrix. But they're getting their insight from the meta scripture, from the news. So they're mystifying the news testament. And it's intentional. That's an intentionally planted misdirection line that conceals the man behind the curtains. Joe from Connecticut says, that's why every time I hear someone in the media say you can't make this stuff up, I always say, right, after, oh, yes, you can. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. People say you can't make this stuff up. It's like, well, actually, someone made this up. They wrote the script. They planned this out years ago. And you think it's current news. So we're looking at time control. So we talk about Saturn, Saturnian matrix, time control. Well, in a very real way, we're looking at time control because we're looking at the manipulation of history itself, the timeline. That is time control. The writers didn't make a good plot for the last season, but they're prophetic as to how Trump is turning out. Again, prophetic, that's a religious term. There are no real prophets. So how is this? Well, they're calling it a prophet for the obvious reason, because they have no recourse to information that would explain it. Just like the Homelander, Trump reveals himself to be the villain by the end of the first episode. So that's interesting as well, because Trump's villain arc is being highlighted here. Mass worship and political fanaticism are signs of a society's collective mental health failing. The jokes write themselves used to be an expression. The Boys has somehow become a weekly recap. The irony is hard to miss. This guy says, the Christians that quote Exodus 20 at you about idol worship are bowing to a golden statue of a president. Sam says, it's crazy how close a show about insane superheroes is to our actual reality. That's how completely stupid we become. We are devolving as a species. Okay, now, so Zara here says, okay, now they need to kill Homelander off and wait and see what happens. Now, it's funny, but the show's already been written. This show's already, the script was written years ago. So they're missing that. A Newful says, I think the overlords are getting tired. This is the reason they're getting so obvious in the slot programming. You know, this is something we've talked about. It's like, is it becoming more obvious, or are there just more people paying attention? But we're in a different media ecosystem now. The internet has really changed it to where now it's open to mass criticism, endless remixing and observations, and people comparing notes. So it's not that it's more obvious, but now we can actually talk about it because they've always been sloppy and obvious. And this isn't really a new phenomenon. It's just generally relegated to eerie or spooky. But this is just one that is so unignorable that they have to notice it. Placebo Bryanson says, Trump supporters act like The Boys is mocking them in real time, but the writers just imagined what he would do years ago. So again, you want to fall into the idea that the writers are just prescient? By all means, go ahead. But the coincidental nature of it suggests what I call entrainment between fake simulated events, theatrical events, PR stunts, and the news media and the entertainment. These things are all happening at the same time. News media is reporting on a fake event as it happens in the movies. So it's not that they're prescient or that they're just imagining things. It's the coincidental nature of it. It's happening at the same time. And again, this is not the first time it's happened with the boys. Again, like Dan says, it wasn't predicting the future, it was holding up a mirror. Yeah, that explanation would hold water if and only if you didn't have to factor in coincidences. And then, of course, people say, well, coincidences are just coincidences. Right. Zombie Killer says, this was recorded before all that Trump BS. Yep, get that. All right, let's move on. Between the boys and Grand Theft Auto writers, I bet they're both looking at the years of scripting they've done and just go shrug. Fiction like the boys work best when it makes audiences question where entertainment ends and reality begins. We'll see. Okay, listen to this. They have 2 episodes left to utterly defeat and destroy this all-powerful psychopath. This better not end with him triumphant. So this is interesting because they've inadvertently stumbled into our territory. This guy's suggesting, and I think this is actually true, that whatever we see in the final 2 episodes will be reflected in whatever happens with Trump. Rob says, what's funny is the season was recorded long before any of this. Written 2 or 3 years ago. This is insane. All right, let's move on. Next topic. So if you didn't see it, here's the video of the evangelicals dedicating the statue to Trump.
I want to make sure everyone can hear. Okay, sir.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, so Trump isn't there. He's actually, this is funny. He's appearing, I think he's showing up remotely. They should have just put the speaker near the mouth of the statue. Isn't that what the Wizard of Oz, if you haven't seen it, it's, obviously it's in this new version, it's Trump, but in the Wizard of Oz, he's behind this massive animatronic face of himself, and then he's speaking from behind the scenes. So now we're actually looking at a religious gathering at the golden statue, and then we're hearing Trump blessing it, but I don't think he's there in person.
I want to make sure everyone can hear. Okay, sir.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank you so much for being there today, and more importantly, for what you did. The statue is beautiful. I saw it during the weekend. We had a big PGA tournament with a great champion, and all great champions, actually, but it was a great tournament, and I got to look at it very closely, and it's incredible. And I just want to thank you. I know it was done from love, and I want to thank Mark Burns, a pastor. He's a good pastor. He's a good man. I've known him a long time. He's been with me from the beginning, right from the beginning, maybe about 2 days.
Okay, that's enough. I'm just pointing out here, yeah, they should have just put the speaker right there on the statue. Like the golden statue's talking to them. All right, moving on. Cyberquaker, you got to be kidding me. The same day a pastor dedicated a golden statue of Trump, the boys aired an episode of the pastor doing the same thing. Okay, that's another element too. In the TV show, it's a pastor delivering the speech. There's a pastor there unveiling the statue. And the same day. So again, same day. What do you call that? Concurrent programming. And it's a pastor. Keep in mind, no, we already got this one here. The writer said it was filmed way before. They were just thinking of the worst things that could happen. So this is from April 8th. Homelander places a CGI statue of himself in New York to promote season 5. In April, the season 5 promotion was putting golden statues in different cities. So they've been dropping off these Homelander statues in different cities as some kind of promotion. They did it as a bit. The boys did the same bit for the whole week. You can't make this up. Okay, getting back to the UFO thing, Marcus Pitton posted this. He says, I've been trying to help people understand what they're seeing here. So you have the angel, right? The angel. If you haven't seen it, there's a video that people are saying it's an 8-winged angel. Well, this person here added a couple of features to show you that what you're actually looking at here is a flare with a parachute. A flare with a parachute. That's your UFO. Oh, you all hear the cat? Paul tweets, this is Paul and Lettner. He says, watch Independence Day from 1996. Something will stand out to you as strange. None of it is ironic. We've been so irony poisoned that it's hard to believe how sincere we used to be. Yeah, this is definitely the case. The movie Independence Day did present this almost naive view of things. It was pre 9/11. And yeah, a lot of things have, I think, fundamentally changed since then. But Roland Emmerich's Independence Day is noteworthy because it happens to have a pretty good depiction of buildings falling down on people. And when 9/11 happened, it was a typical reference point. Oh, we're like living in Independence Day. Yeah, that's my co-host. Trad West says, this is Aleister Crowley's depiction of a demon. Look familiar? So this is what I mentioned a few times. This is the alien character that Aleister Crowley claimed to have encountered. And this is the picture of it that he drew in 1918. And it does, in fact, have the same proportions as your Roswell alien. So if you imagine this guy wearing sunglasses, you would have your modern Roswell alien. But this is a demon. And if you look at the later OTO stuff past Crowley's death, and he died incidentally in 1947, a lot of them did really get into ufology, essentially alien worship. That's actually a big part of what they were doing under Kenneth Grant's work. And a number of his books have become available on YouTube as audiobooks. And I've been checking them out. And they definitely, okay, so for one thing, this is a religious group, you know, the OTO. But under the direction of Kenneth Grant, they incorporated a lot of H.P. Lovecraftian fiction into their ceremony, into their ritual. So you have the original version under Crowley where it's Egyptian. Well, now they're mixing Egyptian with science fiction, with H.P. Lovecraft. So they're quite literally mixing science fiction into their religion. And consider the implications with Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, science fiction space religion. But this is where it was overtly mixed. And I was listening to one of the audiobooks, and they were describing it as this. His explanation was, well, the reason why you can include the science fiction from H.P. Lovecraft in the mythos without invalidating it is that Lovecraft's fiction isn't really so much fiction, but it's channeled from the same sources. And this is not a new idea. I've heard this for a long time. The notion that H.P. Lovecraft was actually channeling something into his work, into his mythos. And if you look at the overlap between a lot of science fiction writers and the science fiction concepts they introduced into our reality, I mean, a lot of predictive programming is contained in the early science fiction. It all makes sense. Dan Blisserin says Nick Fuentes is a Fed. So there's this kind of minor drama going on. Dan Blisserin is a woke right guy who apparently, allegedly, has confronted multiple people like Nick Fuentes in private and tried to get their opinions about how they could assassinate Ben Shapiro. And that story has kind of gone viral. And then when that story leaks, he comes out and he says Nick Fuentes is a Fed. All right, continuing. Candace Owens has located the person who videoed Erica after the shooting, and there's reason to believe it was pre-planned. They had to know there was going to be a shooting to capture her reaction. Makes the shooting seem like a setup. So there you have yet another conspiracy that implicates Erica Kirk as a culprit and operates on the premise, the false premise, that Charlie Kirk was actually killed. You see how they do this? It's rather predictable, repetitive, unimaginative, but this is what conspiracy theorists do. And there's no conspiracy that's exempt from this. That's why I remark that it's just very out of touch of the Morgile to be taking sides with Candace Owens in this thing. So here it is. Lucas Cage and Nick Fuentes claim that in individual meetings, Dan Bilzerian asked how to kill Shapiro and Israeli politicians. Nick Fuentes says, when I was at his house, he had us put our phones in another room and then asked how difficult it would be to assassinate Israeli government ministers. So it's feds versus feds right now. Area 503 reports, the main media loses its mind over a star-shaped UFO. In reality, it's a parachute flare recorded in infrared. Look, my expectations were set appropriately low, so I was by no means surprised by what kind of slop they gave people, and I'm not shocked that most people fell for it. A lot of people thought this was an angel from God. Like, the angel crowd went nuts over this. Like, are they even trying really hard? Have they given up on the possibility of actually tricking us with aliens? Marcus remarks here, Marcus Pittman, any Christian minister who called this an angel needs to step down. I knew it was obviously something other than a UFO when I saw the smoke trail. Jordan Crowder says, we have people high in the government using fuzzy videos of parachutes with flares, saying these are seraphim. This is your government disclosure. They're not trying hard or something. What do you all think the agenda here is? What is the agenda behind providing very bad evidence and making these people look foolish? And then leading the charge is Representative Luna. Outer Gateways by Kenneth Grant. I retweeted it. That's the book that has the Lam alien. You can find the audiobook. And again, their contention is the science fiction stuff is channeled information. I always thought that was interesting because H.P. Lovecraft's books contain books. It's like in his book, there's a story, in his stories, in his mythos, there are these forbidden books on magic. And these books will summon the old ones. Well, somebody, essentially anonymously, published a book matching the description of one of his fictional books. And then this book, the Necronomicon, actually spawned actual cults who were of the belief that they were indeed working with ancient deities that H.P. Lovecraft had inadvertently summoned. So Lovecraft has formed the basis of a lot of new, kind of a strain of like pagan worship. All right, Mick West has already debunked this stuff as well. All these things have explanations. Did they abandon Project Bluebeam? Well, that's what I'm asking here. I'm asking, Did they just give up on Project Bluebeam? Is it not going to work? Oh, by the way, this is fake. I made this one. It didn't go viral. I said this image is on page 33 of the UFO files. Apollo astronauts saw this. What is the government hiding? And it's a black cube floating in space above the moon. It's fake. None of the recent releases here were new. These are all just, they were just put together. Bauer says aliens are demons. Alistair Crowley quotes here. I don't know if this is an actual quote. Today they call them angels and demons. Tomorrow they will call them something else. So that's the perspective that there is a there, that there is something, a basis for it. A lot of people think this is a distraction from the Epstein files. Here, have some alien files. The aliens are demonic is the official GOP position, says Dr. Zen Hatton. Again, if you were listening to this channel even 2 years ago, we've already reached that. Here you have Representative Lauren Boebert. I do believe these are fallen angels. I do believe this is more spiritual. And if you really want to go there, it's demonic.
The more I see the Old Testament and what was told to us there of fallen angels and Nephilim. I mean, this is in the Bible. There's nothing that says that fallen angels, that Nephilim just disappeared. And so I believe that this could be an aspect of it.
Now, I don't know if she's right in her biblical history. Didn't the flood get rid of the Nephilim? We already talked about the football-shaped UFO. It's an actual. This is also, to me, somewhat disingenuous. If you only read the first line here, another image is an FBI photo described as resembling a football in the Indo-Pacific, in a regular-shaped orange area that appears for 2 seconds. So if you just read the first line, you're like, oh, it's an FBI photo of a football in the sky. Next line. It's overlaid by a graphic of an object described by an eyewitness. It's a composite sketch. Okay, well, you should have mentioned the composite sketch first, because you might lead some people with short attention spans to reach the wrong conclusion. Thank you, Irrational Exuberance, for supporting the IPS. I get these Ko-Fi donations, and it shows up on my Twitter feed. Ken says, maybe since everyone is expecting a fake invasion, then they know it's not going to work, so they're modifying it into a fake demon apocalypse. And that could work. Have you all seen this book going around? Everything I Don't Understand is a Demon. A handy guide for the evangelical mind. It's got a Ouija board, evolution, a brain, crystals, a UFO. Aliens, demons, check. Science, check, demons. Different cultures, check, they're demons. We never really got a firm definition. I'll have to ask Rep. Luna, what is the definition of interdimensional? And tell me that's not a world stage name. They should have just called her Looney, because they set her up and the people who listen to her up to be looking loony after this thing goes down. Tim Burchett gets a phone call from Pete Hegseth, who says, I don't want everybody to get their hopes up. So let's bring that up. They want to believe. So they don't know these things are true. They believe them to be true, and they want to believe, and they're hoping to have their beliefs justified with facts so they can be believers openly. And you know, this is like, it's like a religious thing where you have faith in something that you haven't actually experienced. So for example, you've never met your God, but you have faith that it exists. So what we have here is an analogous faith. They have faith in their alien saviors. And when I say that aliens are the angels for the atheists, this is exactly what I mean. They have the same framework for comprehending it and processing it. It's a superstition. It's something they have faith in. All right, so we covered pretty much everything that I wanted to get to today. We will be over in Discord afterward. I have a lot of things I'm working on here to get the channel on a very solid basis with a schedule. A lot of these alien hopefuls are left looking kind of crazy, a little too naive and gullible. They got loosh milked. You had all these ufologists, dying because they're going to reveal something, or supposedly they created this perception that this was a big deal. And now what? I guess it's all a build-up. Here's your consolation prize, though. You didn't get your alien apocalypse, your alien rapture, your alien technology. We're not getting our world peace. We're not getting any kind of revelation. But your consolation prize? Oh, yeah, you're going to get a movie by Steven Spielberg about aliens. That's your consolation prize. Your faith in aliens is not going to be rewarded by a tractor beam taking you into a saucer. Like, you're not going to get it. You're not going to be taken into the heavens, or space, as they call heaven these days. You know who looks really bad here? Aren't really the alien people, but I think the ones who look the worst are the religious grifters, the pastors, who claim the government was telling them, prepare your flock. Never happened. Who saw the flare parachute and said it was an angel. It's been debunked. It's like they put their credibility on the line. The problem is you can't lose your credibility in today's media environment simply for being wrong or overhyping something, some kind of infotainment. You don't lose any credibility for that because that's what they want. The audiences want conspiratainment. They want to be infotained. They want to see more stories about Illuminati sacrifices of celebrities. They want to be hyped up about the deep state and Epstein. But resolution, nah, they don't really care. It's on to the next thing. So the next thing. And one guy tried to say, oh no, the next thing's going to be big, but it'll be in 60 to 90 days. It's like, okay, I'll hold my breath. Duet says, I'm praying for the good lurkers. Yeah, I want to say thanks to all the listeners, lurkers and chatters alike. We'll be continuing this conversation tomorrow. This is Infinite Plane Society. Open Phones for Open Minds, Saturnday edition, where we often get into the discussion of the Saturnian demiurge matrix and how it overlaps with the media. And we discuss different models of consciousness to explain our experiences. Today, thanks to Jamarian, we spent a lot of time talking about predestination, which is an interesting topic. So thanks for bringing that up. We'll definitely be continuing this in the Discord voice chat. So if you want to get into Discord, go to ips.monster, click the link. Our primary focus today is the overlap between the Homelander and Trump, which we've noted for years now. We also brought up a very disturbing anagram for hantavirus, which you can look into if you care. Oh yeah, let me read this one. Critterfest sent this to me. He said, you have convinced me about 9/11. It was totally staged. A guy I know has a ton of footage from that day that I'd never seen before. I had to beg him to show me. And he asked me, do you notice something? There were no bodies, not one. You don't even see one person on the ground. They were saying there were 50 jumpers or more, but the footage they keep hidden shows no bodies. He said while filming that day, he had to be careful because they were stealing everything from people who were filming. Thank you, you convinced me. Peace. Now, I was talking about how there were so many closed movie sets closed sets because there were so many drills going on that day, specifically for terror attacks, that could explain the absence of any onlookers. But I do recall, probably for national security, anybody recording it, I recalled instances of people saying that their cameras were taken, that CCTV footage was snagged, and such. So Kurtifest claims that his friend has footage from the day that wasn't seized, and it's lacking in actual deaths, which is intriguing. I hope it's true. Right now it's anecdotal. I would ask him to, if he doesn't mind, just to break into his friend's house and get all those videos, send them our way. He'll just think it's the FBI. I mean, unless you can get him to give them to you voluntarily. But this is a big deal. And if you want to do something for the team, we could use that footage. But yeah, I mean, I think it sounds accurate, but I need to see it. What's the next current thing? Iran is kind of over, I think. Maybe they're going to hype that up again. I guess we can go back to Epstein. Maybe that guy, Palm Beach Pete, can show up on Joe Rogan. He should just go around signing autographs. Because his fan base would certainly support it. If you didn't know, the Epstein lookalike is now like a minor celebrity. He's probably going to be an influencer very soon. Adam Mann says, I have an older friend that said she worked there and everyone is told not to come to work that day. Interesting. How many movie directors and celebrities were supposed to be there? Like Michael Jackson, I think Mark Wahlberg, Seth MacFarlane. Then you have in fact, we have not even scratched the surface. And I try not to overemphasize that particular event because it's just one in a sequence of many. And if they can get you to hyper-focus on one event, meanwhile, they're getting away with many more, well, they've effectively turned it into a limited hangout where they offer some truth but muddy the waters, and they study the people who are trying to get to the truth, and they form a movement around it to gather those inquisitive types. 9/11 truthers have all been roped in by controlled opposition. And that's why they run with stories like direct energy weapons, other people did it, it was real, but it was a false flag. Yeah, that's all the result of a carefully constructed propaganda campaign designed to direct those who don't buy the mainstream story. AngsG says maybe Palm Beach Pete and Luigi Mangione can do a social media tour together. That's actually good writing. I think that would do well. Like if I have any input on the script, I would like Candace Owens to leave her husband for Tyler Robinson. Like maybe have some dramatic courtroom reveal of their feelings for each other. Maybe even a PDA. I would love to be a consultant for the PSYOP entertainment complex. I think I could be an asset. All right, we'll talk soon. Thanks for your comments.